and I will try to fix you.
Sports games are an absolute anomaly in our weird little world. It's essentially a game within a game, trying to simulate what the game in real life is like. It's some of the most profitable games out there, year after year after year, and yet some of the most divisive ones too. And in a way, one of the most potentially alienating genres to a casual gamer out there. It's been the building blocks for publishers and studios to become empires from ethical and unethical practices. Here's the thing though. While in recent times all sorts of genres have been innovating the gaming world, such as the rise of Souls-like games, in RPG with its minimal storytelling and discovery, the mental push by action-adventure games to create the most awe-inspiring graphics and tell the best narratives they can, the advent of crossplay breaking down barriers between consoles and PCs alike that have been there for generations just for us to be able to enjoy multiplayer together. So, what does sports games have to boast about? Surely a genre of almost an annual release cycle will be challenging its developers to find new and creative ways to keep us entertained and keep the games fresh, and to just warrant why we are paying full price every year for the next iteration of the game. Well, you see, that's where things start to get murky. Changes in annual sports games are incremental at best. What's more, reviews over the years have consistently been declining, and casual gamers and sport gamers alike have been calling out publishers to improve the state of their game. So, why do these annual cycles seem so lucrative? Wait, no, I know the answer to that one.
Money!
Now, what's in it for us? Why has it worked for so long, and why is it still likely to work in the future? The bigger question is, should it? Join me in my quest to find a fix for annual sports games. When it comes to games, there always is a specific type of customer to cater for. An RPG fan will be drawn to games like The Witcher and Elder Scrolls. A shooter enthusiast will likely pick up Call of Duty or Battlefield. Similarly, a sports fan will love the idea of a FIFA, a Madden, or an NBA game. The kicker rests in when the games release. While in a calendar year we expect a plethora of RPG games, shooters, and others, usually there's only one FIFA, one Madden, and one NBA every year. Since a sports fan is typically not going to be all that interested in purchasing other games, they don't mind paying yearly for a sports game, even if it is at this full price. Whether that full price is justified is up to your perception. For a casual gamer, this might not seem to make that much sense. Ideally, if you are a fan of a gaming franchise, you would expect a different experience when playing a newer game compared to an older game, or updated graphics or performance, or just feel justified why you are paying for a new game. All in all, most sports fans really just want to be able to take the real teams and real players and enjoy a fantasy setting where they are in control of everything and just play the sport they love. Such as, what if I want a Mbappe, Neymar and Messi in the same team? Oh, that's been done, huh? Well, what about Cristiano Ronaldo joining some random Arabian league? I mean, that's not possible, right? Damn, these FIFA scriptwriters are starting to remind me of The Simpsons. On the other hand, that does open them up to more scrutiny. Remember how I said games like the Arkham series and Gotham Knights are subject to more criticism because they are based on media such as comic books, where there's things like canon, and there's a whole different type of media of rules you sort of have to follow, and all that stuff? The same goes for sports games. You are trying to code and think how a professional athlete would think in any given situation for a specific position in a team. And if you don't code that well, a sports fan will immediately pick that up and scrutinize you for it. Maybe a fielder in cricket doesn't dive that way for a ball. Maybe it's a quarterback doesn't throw a ball just willy-nilly, he sometimes takes the sack. You can't predict this stuff because you have to just try and code it, but they will scrutinize you for it. And a great use case for this is Madden, where the internet is chock full of these videos describing glaring issues that has carried over the annual games, where AI just don't behave like a realistic athlete would. Which brings me on to the next point of realism in sports games. There is another sticky point when it comes to the comparison of a traditional game compared to a sports game. In any other game, you get to call the shots at what type of gameplay you want, how mechanics in your game work. You can place the character in any world you please, decide how much they can explore, you can write the lore, because it is a work of fiction. Your work of fiction. In sports games, the rulebook is already written for you, and the thing is, that rulebook rarely changes. Year in and year out, sports are more or less played according to the same laws as it would 10 or 20 years ago. Even more so, sports are usually played in a similar fashion for a number of years. Attacking play is favored, perhaps a certain style or formation, or even just a set way of this is the best way to play the sport. That means the gameplay is barely changing. And for a game you plan on releasing annually that's supposed to kind of behave the same as the real life version, how do you innovate with such a limited scope? And sometimes sports have rules and gameplay so complex, one does wonder how a developer would even begin to translate that into code or a game without deviating too much from the real deal. But sometimes that's just it. Sometimes you just don't follow the rules. Rugby 08 is arguably, oh screw it, forget arguably, it is the greatest rugby game of all time. Take one of the more complex sports out there with difficult to interpret laws and complicated mechanisms like mauls, scrums and rucks, and throw away like half the rulebook, and you get this masterpiece. Its graphics are dated, it only had limited tournaments, offline gameplay, no real updates, and very repetitive animations, but I don't care. I didn't care because the gameplay loop was so irresistible. And that's kind of where the key possibly lies when it comes to making the gameplay of a sports game eye-catching. NFL Blitz was a fantastic series of games that featured real NFL teams and real NFL players, but made the gameplay over the top, violent, and featured arcadey features like monster throws from quarterbacks and freak athletic plays on the offense and defense. Or what about games like the Tony Hawk series, Steep, or Descenders? These are games that feature real-life tricks of the sport and its technical aspects and the difficulties, but they don't hesitate to go completely off the rails in its gameplay because it understands that it is, in that same sense, a game. Now, I'm not saying we should just deviate away and not try to make the sport in the game as close to its real counterpart. It's perfectly fine to have a sports game trying to emulate it as much as it can, but the thing is, that gameplay loop can, in my eyes, only get you that far. And since your gameplay changes every year or minimal, the fact that you release a game every year, it only further highlights the limited innovation it can have on offer. I still would play Rugby 08 to this day if I could. And oh, they tried making more rugby games after it. They even tried to bring in more of the laws and have all these clever new things and stuff. But the thing is, they just don't work. And now you might ask, if these games with their simple and fun gameplay loops are so beloved by sports and casual fans alike, where are they these days? Well, that brings us to the final point. In any other game, you can write any type of character you would like to give them any sort of personality, story, and abilities. Even Hitler, because they are your creations. They are your fiction which you can change with your heart's desire. In a sports game trying to emulate its real-life version, you are using real teams and real players. And these teams and players usually don't just let you put them in your game for free. Licensing in sports games have been around pretty much since it began. It's the reason why a lot of franchises ceases to exist, such as NFL Blitz when Madden took over or EA took over, and how companies like 2K have taken over from EA when it comes to the NBA, and is now on their way to make their own potential NFL game. Now that we mention it, EA and FIFA have also parted ways for the first time in 25 years because of the licensing renewal. And now, do you actually need licensing to make a good sports game? I would say no. It is perfectly possible to release a sports game without a single license. That being said, if you are planning on doing this, it makes more sense to then introduce more arcade-like gameplay or just something casual to your game. Because trying to make a realistic game with fake players running around kind of seems silly. Not to mention, sport gamers do enjoy seeing their favorite real teams or brands or players in games. Racing gamers, for example, are one of the most infamous, with the absence of names such as Toyota and Audi in Need for Speed games are still talked about to this day. I'm also not going to pretend like I know what's going on in those licensing contracts when it comes to developers and sports organizations. But what is evident is that it's like a catch-22. By buying the licenses, you are subscribing towards a more realistic model for your game, which you will need to price accordingly to cover your costs. With that, you're now also limiting who will be buying your game because of its higher price and because you can't make too many changes to it. It's not an endless cycle, but it is a cycle which developers are not brave enough to break or are too comfortable to change, especially when you don't have the competition around to challenge you. The concept of an annual release in a sports game is something that might have made sense perhaps 10 or so years ago, when technology was changing noticeably enough to introduce fresh, new concepts and graphical updates and impressive visuals every annum. But it makes less and less sense as the years go on. And despite the best efforts of some developers to lure casual with interesting new ideas like story-based career modes, competitive online multiplayer, and social spaces, the reality is that is just not enough. More so, these online aspects are starting to take over sports games, which might be cool for a longer multiplayer experience, but neglecting that other offline players like me who just wants to play a career mode possibly in FIFA and just not changing it over every year is kind of soul-crushing. So if you look past the profitability, there's just no feasibility behind it for developer or consumer alike. So what would my fix be in this situation? I think for me it would boil down to this. First, just scrap the idea of an annual game release. It's not worth it, scrap it, forget about it. Rather give my developers more time to bring forth more innovation, allow more technology to develop to introduce cool new features, and give both casual gamers and seasoned sports veterans the feeling like the game they purchased has longevity, both online and offline. Don't neglect either. The model of this could also work two ways. You can charge either a priced game with then continual updates to accommodate roster changes to teams, promotions or relegations in leagues, and other seasonal sports things that will keep the game fresh and up to date. Or have an initial free game that then charges for those same seasonal updates, similar to eFootball. Ugh, that name. Then the player has the ability to choose whether they are content with playing what they have or paying for updates to teams and leagues. In all honesty, I would definitely love also if sports games were more open to being arcade-like. I can understand it would not be everyone's cup of tea, but that's the beauty I feel of the racing gaming community. For every realistic simulation like Gran Turismo, Forza or Dirt Rally, there's the arcadey Need for Speed or the wacky Wreckfest among others. Everyone has a little bit of its own innovation that can make any racing fan happy. And I hope sports games embrace that sometime again. Just so we can all just play sports and have fun in our own way. In the end, I hope they develop something that is not profitable, but enjoyable. But those are my thoughts, just let me know what you guys think in the solution to all this. It's been something that I've been trying to mull and think over the whole time, but genuinely, I think it's time to call for an end to annual sports games. But, maybe you guys have different thoughts. Thank you all again who support these videos. It is a blessing to have so many of you discussing these things with me and sharing your thoughts. Please keep doing so. It's so lovely to read and discuss with all you. Until next time, I will see you guys on the playing field.
Jou brein hoog nooi, jou donker kop, jou pannenkoek, jou lollipop, Jou toetsie toets, jou sonnestraal, vir jou kom ek nog haal.